It was 2:43 a.m. when Kevin Sullivan awoke to the faint sound of scratching at his bedroom window. He lived alone in a small townhouse in Dayton, Ohio, and the night outside was unusually still. No wind, no rain, nothing to explain the noise. The scratching continued in a slow, irregular rhythm, like fingernails dragging across glass. Kevin sat up, heart pounding. His apartment was dark, the only light coming from the soft orange glow of the street lamp outside. His dog, Max, a small beagle, growled from the foot of the bed, ears pinned back, body tense. Kevin reached for the flashlight on the nightstand and flicked it on, its narrow beam cutting through the room. Nothing. He listened closely. The scratching stopped. The silence was oppressive, making him hyper-aware of every small creak in the apartment. Kevin shook his head, trying to tell himself it was just his imagination, a byproduct of working the night shift at the factory for weeks straight. Then he heard it, a whisper, faint, raspy, coming from somewhere behind him. Kevin. He spun around, shining the flashlight. Nothing. Max barked, low and urgent, his hackles raised. Kevin's stomach dropped. He knew he was alone, or at least he thought he was. He got out of bed slowly, gripping the flashlight like a weapon, and stepped into the hallway. The floorboards creaked beneath his weight. He glanced toward the living room. The sliding glass door to the patio was ajar. He had locked it before bed. A thin trail of wet footprints led from the door across the carpet toward the couch. Kevin froze. The prints were small, human, but he had not seen anyone enter. Max whimpered at his feet, tail tucked. Kevin moved closer, flashlight shaking, following the footprints. They stopped near the kitchen doorway. And then he saw it, a dark silhouette, motionless, standing in the corner, taller than any man should be, shoulders hunched. Its head was tilted slightly, and though the room was dimly lit, Kevin could see the faint gleam of eyes reflecting the flashlight. He froze. "You shouldn't be awake," the figure whispered, voice low, raspy, like it had to crawl through the air to reach him. Kevin's breath caught in his throat. He took a step back. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound other than that whisper, yet the room seemed heavier, colder, as if the air itself was pressing down on him. He stumbled back toward the bedroom, fumbling with the door lock. Max darted ahead, barking frantically. Kevin slammed the door, bolted it, and pushed the dresser against it. He grabbed the phone from the nightstand and dialed 911, but when the operator answered, there was only static. Minutes passed. The scratching returned, now at the bedroom door, slow, deliberate. Then the whisper again, "You can't leave. Not at night." Kevin pressed himself against the dresser, trembling. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. The minutes stretched endlessly, each second a torment. When morning finally came, Kevin cautiously opened the door. The living room was empty. The sliding glass door was closed and locked. No footprints, no evidence that anyone had entered the apartment. The phone had no missed calls, no voicemails, nothing to suggest that the night had been real. Kevin didn't stay in that apartment again. He moved to a small town outside Dayton, changed jobs, and tried to rebuild a normal life. But the terror didn't leave him. Every night around 2:43 a.m., he feels the oppressive presence return, hears the faint scratching at the windows and the same soft, raspy whisper, "You can't leave at night." He has learned not to argue, not to fight it. He stays inside, lights on, doors locked, never daring to venture outside after dark. Because it always finds him. Story the end. It was just past midnight when I realized something was wrong. I was living alone in a small two-story house in rural Kentucky, about 20 minutes outside the nearest town. The property was quiet, surrounded by woods and farmland, and I'd always thought the isolation would be peaceful. That night, it wasn't. I had been watching TV in the living room, the faint hum of the fluorescent bulb above me and the low crackle of the heating vent filling the empty house. I was just about to head to bed when I heard it, the faintest creak from the stairs behind me. At first, I froze, thinking it was just the house settling. But the sound repeated, slowly, deliberately. Someone or something was coming down the stairs. I sat perfectly still, heart hammering. The stairs were old pine, and each step creaked when pressure was applied. Whoever it was careful, deliberate, but I could hear them. Step, pause, step, pause. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. Silence. I reached for the kitchen knife on the counter, gripping it tightly. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. Maybe it was an animal, but the steps were too heavy, too measured. This was no raccoon or stray cat. Then the whisper came. Soft, low, barely audible. My name. I spun around, swinging the knife toward the staircase. Nothing, just the dim shadows stretching across the walls. I grabbed my phone and flipped on the flashlight. The beam swept across the room, catching the staircase. Halfway down, a shadow moved. It wasn't human, or at least not like any human I'd ever seen. It was tall, thin, hunched slightly, with long limbs that seemed to bend in ways they shouldn't. Its head tilted unnaturally to one side, like it was examining me. Its face was featureless, smooth, pale, except for two black holes where eyes should have been. I froze. Then it moved. Slow, jerky steps, each one making the floorboards groan under its weight. It came closer, tilting its head, and the whisper repeated, "You shouldn't be here." I ran. I bolted for the front door, not stopping to grab my coat or my keys. Outside, the night air hit me like a wall, cold and damp. I sprinted to my truck, fumbling to unlock it. I kept looking back. The house looked empty in the moonlight, the staircase dark, silent. I told myself it was a hallucination. Stress. Sleep deprivation. Anything. But I couldn't explain the feeling of being watched, the lingering sense of something standing right behind me, just out of sight. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the truck in the driveway, lights on, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Around 3 a.m., I heard a soft knock on the window. I didn't move. The knock came again, then another, coming from the back of the truck this time. My heart raced so fast I thought it would burst. I got out, flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam around the truck. Nothing. The ground was undisturbed. The air was still, almost oppressively so. The next morning, I went inside. Everything looked normal. The house showed no signs of entry, no footprints, nothing. I even checked the staircase where I thought I saw it. No marks, no signs that anyone had been there. For a week, nothing happened. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, but every night I felt the same oppressive weight, the same eyes watching. Then, one night, around 2:15 a.m., I woke to the sound of breathing in my bedroom. Slow, wet, deliberate. Not mine. Not from any animal I knew. I reached for the baseball bat beside my bed. The breathing stopped when I sat up. I shined my phone's flashlight across the room. Nothing. Then the whisper. Right in my ear. "You can't leave." I jumped, swinging the bat blindly. The room was empty, but the voice remained, low and broken, echoing off the walls. I grabbed my coat and ran outside again. This time, I didn't stop. I drove into town, parked at a 24-hour diner, and didn't go back that night. I didn't sleep for days. When I finally returned to pack my things, I found the front door unlocked. I was sure I had locked it. The staircase inside looked darker than I remembered, like it was absorbing light. The air was heavy. I grabbed my bags and didn't stop until I reached the highway. Even now, months later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and feel it. The weight of someone watching, the whisper in my ear, soft and low, calling my name. And sometimes when I glance at the shadows in the corner of the room, I swear I see it, standing there, tilting its head, waiting. I know I'll never forget that night. I know I'll never feel completely safe again. Story the end. It was just past 2 a.m. when Lisa finally pulled into the driveway of her new apartment. She'd moved to a small town in Ohio for a teaching job, leaving behind the chaos of the city. The apartment was cheap, almost too cheap, and the lease was month to month. The complex was old, long, narrow hallways, a faint smell of mildew, and the kind of silence that made ordinary noises sound terrifying. Lisa unlocked her door, dropped her bag, and flipped on the lights. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. She shrugged it off and set about unpacking a few things, trying to ignore the unease that had been building all evening. By the time she crawled into bed, the house felt like it was breathing around her. She told herself it was just her imagination, the nerves of moving to a strange place. Around 3:05 a.m., she woke to a soft, scratching sound. At first, she thought it was the pipes. Then she realized it was coming from the window, her bedroom window that faced the parking lot. She froze, straining to listen. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Slow, deliberate. Someone or something was outside. Lisa's first instinct was to call the police, but she hesitated. What if it was nothing? What if she looked ridiculous? Instead, she grabbed a flashlight and edged toward the window. Nothing. The glass was intact, the curtains still hanging straight. But when she looked closer, she saw faint streaks on the glass. smudges like long fingers dragging down. Her stomach sank. She double-checked the locks, then returned to bed, sitting up straight, clutching her phone like a lifeline. She tried to convince herself it was just the wind, a branch scraping against the window. Then she heard it again, but this time from inside the apartment. A soft tap, tap, coming from the living room. Her breath caught. She hadn't heard anyone enter. She called out, voice trembling, "Hello, who's there?" Nothing. The tapping stopped, replaced by a faint creak, floorboards shifting, slowly approaching her bedroom. Lisa's heart raced. She grabbed the lamp and held it like a weapon, leaning forward to see into the hallway. A figure was standing there, tall, thin, motionless, head tilted unnaturally to one side, pale, featureless, like something had worn human skin and left the rest blank. Lisa's scream caught in her throat. She stumbled back against the wall. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, staring. After what felt like hours, it finally turned and walked down the hallway. Silent. Then the door clicked shut. Lisa didn't sleep again that night. She sat in the dark, every light on, staring at the hallway, shaking. The next day, she found marks on the hardwood floor, barefoot prints leading from the living room to the bedroom. Wet. Clean edges, as though someone had walked in and out in one motion. No footprints led to the door. No sign of forced entry. Over the next week, the events escalated. Objects moved slightly when she returned home. Lights flickered. She'd wake to find the front door unlocked, even though she remembered locking it. On the third night, she heard it again. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing across the living room. She held her breath under the blanket. The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom. Then a whisper, "You shouldn't be here." Lisa bolted out of bed and ran to the door. The hallway was empty, but on the wall, smeared across the paint, were words scratched into the plaster. "I've been waiting." Panic gripped her. She packed a bag and left for a motel down the street. She couldn't stay another night. But when she returned to the apartment a few days later to grab the rest of her belongings, she found the front door ajar. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed, but the bathroom mirror had a message written in condensation. "Don't lock me out next time." Lisa never returned to Ohio. She moved hundreds of miles away, hoping to leave the terror behind. But late at night, in her new apartment, she sometimes wakes to the sound of tapping. 3 slow, deliberate knocks coming from the window. And when she looks, she swears she can see a pale, tall figure, head tilted, standing just outside the glass. Story the end. It was 2:43 a.m. when Sarah Miller woke to the faint sound of scratching coming from her front door. She lived alone in a small suburban home in Columbus, Ohio, and the night outside was unnervingly silent. No wind, no traffic, just the quiet hum of the streetlights outside and the low whine of her cat, Luna, at the foot of the bed. Sarah sat up, heart hammering. She rubbed her eyes and tried to convince herself it was just a dream. But Luna's fur was standing on end, tail stiff, and she let out a low hiss toward the hallway. Gripping the flashlight from the nightstand, Sarah slid out of bed, trying to move quietly. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed pressed down on her chest, heavy and suffocating. She crept toward the living room. The door to the hallway was slightly ajar, though she was sure she had closed it before bed. Her flashlight's beam cut across the floor, revealing nothing at first, but then she saw the footprints. Bare, small, wet, leading from the front door into the living room. She hadn't seen anyone enter. Her stomach sank. A soft, rasping whisper floated through the darkness. "Sarah." Her knees nearly buckled. The voice was familiar, yet alien, as if it belonged to someone who shouldn't exist. She swung the flashlight toward the living room corner and froze. A figure stood there, tall, draped in a dark coat that looked wet, head tilted, face obscured in shadow. Its presence felt wrong, oppressive, cold, almost alive. "You shouldn't be awake," the figure whispered again. Sarah stumbled back, knocking over a lamp. The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just watched. Luna hissed again, arching her back and retreating under the couch. Panic surged through Sarah. She bolted for the bedroom, locking the door and sliding the dresser against it. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, but the line was dead, only static. Then came the soft, slow scraping at the door, nails, or something like nails, dragging along the wood. And the whisper, closer this time, just outside the door, "You can't leave. Not at night." Sarah pressed herself against the dresser, trembling, eyes wide, unable to sleep. She stayed that way until sunrise. When morning came, she opened the door cautiously. The living room was empty. The footprints had vanished. The front door was locked as if no one had entered. Her phone showed no missed calls, no messages, nothing. Sarah didn't return to that house that night. She packed her essentials, stayed with a friend, and eventually moved across the state. But every night, without fail, around 2:43 a.m., she feels the same oppressive presence, hears the faint scraping, and the same voice whispering, "You can't leave at night." She doesn't open doors after dark anymore. She doesn't sleep near windows. She waits, lights on, every night, praying it doesn't find her. Because it always does. Story the end. It was a little past 3 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of my neighbor's dog barking. I lived in a quiet rural area in Pennsylvania, just a stretch of dirt road with 6 houses, surrounded by thick woods and farmland. Nights out there were black as ink. When the moon wasn't up, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. That kind of dark has a way of playing tricks on you, especially when you're half awake. At first, I thought nothing of it. The dog, a big German shepherd named Duke, barked sometimes at deer or raccoons. But that night, it was different. The barking wasn't steady. It came in bursts, low and urgent, almost panicked. Then I heard something else beneath it, a faint scraping sound like metal dragging across gravel. I lay there for a minute, listening. The sound came again, slow, deliberate. I got up, pulled on a sweatshirt, and went to the window overlooking the back field. The moon was thin and weak, barely cutting through the mist that hung over the ground. Duke was standing at the edge of his yard, facing the tree line, his fur standing on end. I couldn't see what he was barking at. Then I heard it again, that metallic dragging noise, only this time it came from my property, from the woods behind my house. I felt a jolt of adrenaline. I lived alone, and the nearest house was about 100 yards away. I grabbed the flashlight I kept on the counter and my old .22 rifle from the closet. I told myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a bear or someone's lost farm equipment shifting in the wind. But the night was still. There was no wind. When I stepped out onto the porch, the air was freezing. The smell of damp earth and wood smoke filled my lungs. The barking had stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that sent chills up my spine. "Duke?" I called softly. The growl cut off. Silence. Then the scraping started again, closer this time, maybe 20 yards away. My flashlight beam shook slightly as I pointed it toward the sound. It caught the glint of something metallic from the trees. It looked like a shovel. Someone, or something, was dragging a shovel through the dirt. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest so loud I could hear it. "Who's out there?" I shouted, raising the rifle. No answer. Just that slow, just rhythmic sound of metal against earth. I took a cautious step off the porch, my boots sinking into the damp grass. The beam of my flashlight wavered as I moved toward the edge of the woods. The darkness there felt wrong, thicker somehow, heavier. The mist clung to the branches, twisting into strange shapes. As I neared the tree line, the scraping stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I strained to listen, but all I could hear was my own breathing. Then, from somewhere ahead, came a faint whisper. At first I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. It was words, low, muttered, and broken. "Shouldn't have dug it up." The voice was raspy, distant, but unmistakably human. I froze in place, my finger tightening on the trigger. "Who's there?" I called. No reply, just the sound of something moving, slow, deliberate footsteps circling me in the dark. I swung the flashlight wildly, catching only glimpses between the trees. Movement, shadows, flashes of pale skin. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, just ahead, the light fell on a man standing about 20 feet away. He was tall and thin, his clothes filthy and torn. His face was gray, smeared with dirt, and his eyes were sunk deep into his skull, black and glossy like wet stones. He held the shovel in one hand, its blade crusted with mud. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" I shouted. The man tilted his head slowly, like he didn't understand the question. Then he said in that same rasping whisper, "You shouldn't have dug it up." "I didn't dig anything," I snapped, though my voice shook. He took one slow step forward. "It's still out here. It's still waiting." I raised the rifle. "Stay back." He smiled then, a horrible, twitching grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Too late," he said softly. "It's already awake." Before I could react, the light from my flashlight flickered out. I spun around in the dark, trying to see, trying to hear. I caught the sound of running footsteps, branches snapping. Then, nothing. The silence swallowed everything again. I stood there for a long time, listening, afraid to move. Finally, I turned back toward the house. My hands shook as I fumbled for the porch light switch. When it came on, it washed everything in a weak yellow glow. I almost dropped the flashlight when I saw them. Footprints. Bare, human footprints leading from the woods right up to my back steps. The mud was thick and wet, still dripping. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, the footprints were gone, washed away by dew or maybe something else. I searched the woods behind the house, but found nothing. No shovel, no man, no sign of disturbance. For a few days, I managed to convince myself it had been some drifter, maybe high, maybe just crazy. But a week later, I found something that changed everything. I was walking along the back edge of my property, clearing fallen branches, when my boot hit something solid. I looked down and saw the edge of a wooden board, half buried in dirt. It was roughly square, maybe 2 feet across. I pulled it up, and underneath was a small hole, a shallow grave. My stomach twisted as I stared into it. Inside was a bundle wrapped in rotted fabric. It smelled like earth and decay. My hands trembled as I unwrapped part of it. Inside was a child's toy, a small hand-carved wooden horse, its paint flaking away. Beneath it was bone, small. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. I ran to the house, grabbed my phone, and called the sheriff. They came out within an hour. The deputies searched the area, cordoned it off, and dug carefully around the hole. When they were done, they told me it looked like human remains, very old. They sent everything off to a state lab for testing. The sheriff told me it was probably from an old homestead burial. Happens more often than you think, he said. This land's been lived on for a couple 100 years. That night, I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept seeing that man's face in my mind, hearing his voice whispering from the trees, "You shouldn't have dug it up." Around midnight, I got up and went to the kitchen for water. That's when I noticed something out the window. Someone was standing at the edge of the field, the same tall, thin figure, motionless, facing the house. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I knew it was him, the man from the woods. I grabbed my rifle and turned on the porch light. The figure didn't move. I stepped outside, shouting, "Who are you? What do you want?" No answer. I blinked once, and he was gone. Just vanished. The next morning, the sheriff came back. They'd gotten results from the lab. The remains they'd found were from a child, estimated to be about 10 years old, buried sometime in the 1940s. There were signs of trauma. They asked me if I'd found anything else or if I'd noticed anyone suspicious in the area. I didn't mention the man in the woods. I sold the house 3 weeks later. I moved into a small apartment in town and tried to put it behind me. But sometimes late at night, I still hear it. That scraping sound. Metal against gravel. Once, a few months ago, I woke to find mud on my apartment's doorstep. Muddy. Barefoot prints. I know it doesn't make sense. I tell myself it's impossible. But deep down, I know the truth. I didn't dig that hole. Someone else did. And whatever they found out there, whatever was buried, it's still looking for something or someone. And maybe, just maybe, it's not done yet. Story the end. It was the middle of February, one of those weeks when the Midwest cold gets inside your bones and refuses to leave. I had just taken a new job in Missouri, working maintenance for a warehouse that stayed open 24/7. They offered cheap employee housing, basically a converted old house behind the property that had been empty for years. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, and I didn't mind being alone. The place was about a mile off the main road, surrounded by open fields and a few patches of woods. It had once been a small farmhouse, long before the warehouse came in. The rent was cheap because, as my supervisor half joked, nobody wants to stay out there too long. I laughed it off then. I shouldn't have. My first few nights were fine. The house was cold, the floors creaked, and the wind howled across the fields, but I'd lived in worse. I'd get home from my shift around 2 or 3 a.m., make some coffee, and sit at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone until I got sleepy. Then came Thursday night. I'd just gotten back from work, around 2:15 a.m., and parked my truck by the shed behind the house. The night was completely still. No wind, no animal sounds, not even the hum of crickets. Just silence. My boots crunched the frost as I walked to the door, and that's when I noticed something off. The light in the living room was already on. I always turned it off before leaving for work. Always. I paused, hand on the doorknob, thinking maybe I'd left it on by mistake. But then I noticed the curtain in the front window. It was moving, like someone had just brushed past it. I opened the door slowly, calling out, "Hello?" The light flickered. My heart started to pound. I stepped inside, checking the corners of the room, but no one was there. Everything looked normal. The couch, the coffee table, my jacket still hanging on the chair where I left it. I told myself the bulb was loose, tightened it, and went to make coffee. I didn't even realize right away that my boots had tracked mud on the floor. Only later did I notice that there were other footprints too, bare ones. Around 3 a.m., I heard a soft thud from upstairs. It was an old house, wood expanding, I told myself. But the sound came again, heavier this time, like someone had dropped something. I grabbed a flashlight and headed for the stairs, my pulse thudding in my ears. Halfway up, the air changed. I can't describe it except to say it felt thicker, like the air itself didn't want me there. My flashlight flickered as I reached the landing. There were only 2 rooms up there, a bedroom and a storage space I hadn't opened yet. I pushed open the bedroom door first. Empty. The bed was still unmade from when I left that morning. Then I turned to the storage door. It was cracked open just slightly. I could see something inside, just a sliver through the gap. A shape, maybe. It looked like fabric. "Hello?" I called out again. Something shifted inside. Slow. Deliberate. I backed away, but curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open with the flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The room was empty except for a few boxes, a broken chair, and an old wardrobe against the far wall. The wardrobe door was open about an inch. I took one step closer, then another. I reached out and pulled it open. Empty. I exhaled, letting out a shaky laugh. I turned to leave, then heard a faint sound behind me. Breathing. I swung the flashlight back toward the wardrobe, but there was nothing. The breathing stopped. I decided I'd had enough. I shut the door to that room, went downstairs, and locked myself in the bedroom. I left the lamp on all night, even though the light buzzed faintly. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, when I left for work, there were muddy, barefoot prints again, this time leading from the staircase to the kitchen, then to the back door. I didn't tell anyone. Not my boss, not the guys at the warehouse. I figured it was maybe a raccoon somehow, though that didn't explain the shape or size. But deep down I knew. Those weren't animal prints. The following night, Friday, I came home late, closer to 3:30 a.m. The house looked dark from the outside. No light, no movement. I stepped in quietly. The air was freezing, colder than outside. My breath came out in thick clouds, and then I heard it. Someone whispering upstairs. It was faint, like someone talking from under a blanket, a soft, steady murmur. I stood in the living room for what felt like minutes, straining to hear the words. I couldn't make them out. Just tone, low, hushed, rhythmic. I turned off my flashlight and stood still. The whispering stopped. Then came the creak of a floorboard directly above me. My throat went dry. I backed toward the door, every muscle screaming at me to leave. But before I could reach the handle, the whispering started again, closer this time. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. I bolted outside, grabbed my phone, and called my boss. He picked up groggily. "What's wrong?" he asked. I told him someone had broken in, that I'd heard voices. He said he'd call the county sheriff and told me to wait by the truck. The deputies arrived 20 minutes later. 2 of them. They searched the whole house, room by room. Nothing. No sign of forced entry. No footprints except mine. The older deputy, a man named Harris, asked if I was sure I hadn't just been dreaming. I told him I was wide awake. Before they left, the younger deputy said something strange. "You know, a man died out here about 15 years ago," he said casually. "Old caretaker, lived alone. They found him upstairs, in that storage room, inside the wardrobe. Heart attack, they said." The older deputy gave him a sharp look, like he shouldn't have said that. But I already knew it was true. I could feel it in the house. They left around 5 a.m., and I decided not to sleep. I sat in my truck until the sun came up. When I finally went back inside to grab my work clothes, I noticed something I swear hadn't been there before. If the wardrobe door upstairs was open again, and inside, on the back panel, someone had scratched words into the wood. Deep, deep, uneven letters. Don't stay here at night. I quit the job the next morning. My boss didn't even argue, he just nodded like he understood. That was 3 years ago. I moved 3 states away, started working construction, kept to myself. But even now, on some nights when the air goes still and the world feels too quiet, I'll wake up around 3 a.m. with that same feeling, the one that tells me I'm not alone. And sometimes when I'm lying there in the dark, I hear it again, that faint whisper threading through the quiet. Only now, it sounds like it's coming from inside my walls. Story the end. It was one of those cold, windless nights where everything outside feels frozen in time, the kind of night where even the hum of distant traffic seems to vanish. I was home alone in my small duplex on the edge of Springfield, Illinois. I worked the late shift at a convenience store and usually didn't get home until around midnight, so I was used to quiet nights. But that night, something about it felt wrong from the moment I pulled into my driveway. The porch light flickered as I got out of the car. I remember standing there for a moment, staring up at the dark windows. It wasn't anything specific, just a feeling, heavy and low, like the air itself was watching me. I shook it off and went inside, locking the door behind me. The house was silent, too silent. Usually the fridge made a low hum or the heater rattled a bit, but that night it was just dead air. I heated up some leftovers, sat on the couch, and turned on the TV for background noise. Around 1 a.m., the power went out. Everything snapped off, the TV, the lights, even the faint buzz of the fridge. I sat there in pitch darkness, the glow from my phone screen, the only light. That's when I heard it. A slow creak from the back hallway. It sounded like a footstep, someone putting their full weight on the old hardwood floor. I froze, straining to listen. The sound came again. Another creak. Then a soft, dragging noise, like something brushing along the floorboards. I whispered, "Hello?" Nothing. The air in the room felt heavy, pressing in on me. I turned on my phone's flashlight and pointed it toward the hall. The beam lit up the narrow space, ending at the closed door to my bedroom. Everything looked normal, but the sound had stopped. I stood up, heart pounding, and slowly made my way toward the hallway. The wooden floor creaked under my feet. I kept the light aimed at the bedroom door. When I reached it, I pushed it open with my foot. The room was empty. I started to back away when I heard something faint. So faint I imagined it, a slow exhale right behind me. I spun around, light flashing across the walls. No one there. I stood perfectly still, listening. My own breathing echoed in my ears, too fast, too loud. I forced myself to calm down, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was the pipes or the wind outside. But then I remembered there was no wind, not even the faintest sound from outside. I shut the bedroom door and went back to the living room. I tried turning the power back on, but the breaker hadn't tripped. Everything was still. I sat on the couch again, clutching my phone, telling myself I was being stupid. Then I saw movement in the reflection of the TV screen. Something was standing in the hallway. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The figure was just there. A tall, black outline, motionless but distinctly human-shaped. I slowly turned my head toward the hallway, but when the flashlight beam hit it, the space was empty. I wanted to leave, to run, but I couldn't move. My whole body felt heavy, locked in place. Then from the darkness, a voice whispered, soft, broken, and impossibly close to my ear. "Why did you come back?" My heart stopped. I whipped around, the light shaking in my hand. Nothing there. That was enough for me. I grabbed my keys, phone, and jacket and bolted out the front door. I sat in my car with the doors locked, engine running, headlights illuminating the front of the house. And that's when I saw it. Through the window, I could see into my living room. The flashlight I dropped was still on, lying on the couch, the beam aimed toward the hallway. Slowly, something stepped into the light, a figure, tall, thin, with shoulders that seemed to stretch too far, its face hidden in shadow. It moved like it was dragging its feet, jerky and wrong, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. I didn't wait. I threw the car into reverse and tore out of the driveway, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't go back until daylight. When I finally did, the house looked completely untouched. The power was back on, the flashlight dead on the floor where I'd dropped it. But there was one thing that didn't make sense. On the wall in the hallway, just outside my bedroom, was a handprint. A long, dark handprint smeared across the wallpaper. The fingers were too long, the shape stretched, and the stain, It wasn't dirt or paint. It looked like something darker. I tried scrubbing it off, but it wouldn't come out. It was like it had soaked into the wall itself. I moved out 2 days later. The landlord didn't argue when I told him I wanted to break the lease. He just nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, people don't usually stay long there." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. That was 6 months ago. I live in a new apartment now in town, surrounded by people and streetlights and noise. But some nights around 1 a.m., I still wake up to that same sound, a creak on the floorboards, slow and heavy, like someone taking a step just outside my room. And sometimes when I glance at the dark corners of my room, I think I see something shift, just out of sight. Story the end. It was close to midnight when I pulled into the small rest stop just off Interstate 64, somewhere between Louisville and Lexington. I'd been driving for 10 hours, my eyes gritty, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. The highway was eerily empty. No headlights in my rearview mirror for at least an hour. I just needed to stretch my legs, splash some water on my face, maybe grab a soda before driving the last leg home. The rest stop was one of those older ones, half the lights flickering, vending machines humming under the buzzing glow of yellow bulbs. There was a small bathroom building at the far end, and two lonely picnic tables under a cracked awning. The parking lot had just two vehicles, a white van parked near the exit, and what looked like an old brown sedan by the trees. I parked a few spots away from the van. The air was cold and heavy, and the trees along the edge of the lot rustled softly, even though there was barely any wind. I got out, stretching, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. The place was so still, it didn't feel real. Just the hum of fluorescent lights, the faint hiss of the vending machines, and my own breathing. I went to the men's restroom first. The motion sensor light flickered on, illuminating cracked tiles, dripping sinks, and a single flickering bulb in the corner. One of the stall doors was shut. I didn't think much of it. Someone could have been inside, but after a few seconds, I realized there were no sounds. No breathing, no movement, nothing. I washed my hands quickly and turned to leave. The door to the stall creaked. Not all the way open, just slightly. Enough for me to see a sliver of dark space inside. "Sorry," I said reflexively, stepping back. The door didn't move. I hurried out, heart thumping. It was probably empty, I told myself. Maybe it had been stuck halfway open. But something about the air inside that bathroom had felt wrong. Too cold, too heavy, like someone was standing right behind me. Back outside, the white van was still there, its headlights off, the windshield glinting faintly. I glanced toward it, uneasy. I could see a shape behind the driver's window, a shadowy figure sitting completely still. No phone light, no movement. Trying to shake it off, I went to the vending machines and bought a soda. When the can clattered into the slot, the noise made me jump. I laughed nervously to myself. The road was getting to me. Then I heard something behind me, a soft, wet shuffle, like shoes dragging across gravel. I turned. Nothing. Just the dimly lit parking lot, the trees swaying. But I could feel it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I turned back toward my car, gripping the soda so tight my hand hurt. And that's when I noticed the brown sedan's driver's side door was now open. I hadn't heard it. I hadn't seen anyone move. My heart began to pound. I scanned the area again. No one near the van. No one near the bathroom. But I could hear something faint now. Breathing. Slow. Uneven. Coming from somewhere near the trees. I got in my car fast, locking the doors. My hands were trembling as I started the engine. The headlights swept across the lot, and that's when I saw her. A woman standing at the edge of the woods. She was barefoot, wearing what looked like a white nightgown soaked through with dark stains. Her hair hung over her face, dripping water onto the pavement. I froze. She wasn't there a moment ago. I hit the gas, reversing so fast the tires squealed. She didn't move, just stood there, her face hidden, one arm twitching slightly like a broken puppet. Then she turned her head toward me. I didn't see her face, just the flash of something pale and distorted. I slammed the car into drive and tore out of the rest stop. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I didn't slow down for 10 miles. When I finally dared to look in the rearview mirror, I nearly drove off the road. The woman was standing on the shoulder of the highway, right at the edge of my headlights. She wasn't running. She wasn't chasing me. She was just there, again, watching. The rest of the drive was a blur. Every time I blinked, I thought I saw her reflection in the glass. Every time my headlights caught a road sign, I half expected to see her standing beneath it. I got home around 3 in the morning, pulled into my driveway, and sat there for a full minute, shaking. My porch light flickered weakly through the windshield. When I finally got out, the night was dead silent. Not even crickets. As I walked up to the door, I noticed something wet on the driver's side of the car. A handprint, small, delicate, smeared across the window. I froze. My throat went dry. I hadn't stopped once since leaving the rest stop. There was no way anyone had touched my car. Inside, I locked every door and window. I didn't even change clothes. I just sat in the living room, staring at the wall, waiting for the sound of something. Anything. But it was silent. When the sun came up, I finally went outside. The handprint was gone. Not faded. Gone. Like it had never been there. For days, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd hallucinated. Maybe I'd been too tired, too stressed. But then something else happened. The following week, I was driving to work when I passed a small newspaper stand. The front page caught my eye. Body found at abandoned rest stop on I-64. I pulled over, shaking, and read the article. It said a woman's body had been discovered near the tree line. The cause of death was unknown. She had been missing for over a year. The article didn't include her name, but there was a photo, a blurred black and white image from her missing persons report. It was her. The same pale face, the same long hair, the same nightgown. I didn't go to work that day. I just drove home and sat in my living room again, blinds closed, hands trembling. That night, around 2 a.m., I heard a faint tapping on my bedroom window. I froze in bed, barely breathing. Tap, 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 slow, wet, rhythmic. I didn't move. Didn't look. I couldn't. I stayed awake until dawn. When I finally checked the window, there was nothing there, but the outside glass was streaked with what looked like condensation, or maybe breath. Sometimes, late at night when I drive home from work, I still think about that rest stop. I check my mirrors more than I should. And every now and then, when I stop at a red light, I swear I can see her faint reflection in the back seat, watching me, waiting for me to stop again. Story the end. It started with the kind of night that feels heavier than usual, the air thick, the wind gone still, a night that makes every sound sharper, every shadow deeper. I was working as a tow truck driver in rural Kansas, and my shifts usually started late, around sunset, and ran straight through until dawn. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid steady. I'd gotten used to lonely highways and dead, quiet fields. But that one night in late November, somewhere near the outskirts of Hutchinson, I found out what real silence feels like. The kind that presses in until you can hear your heartbeat, until even breathing feels too loud. It was around 2:30 a.m. when dispatch radioed me about a vehicle stranded off Highway 50. The driver had called in saying he'd hit something, an animal maybe, and his car wouldn't start. The weird thing was, the call cut off mid-sentence. They couldn't get him back on the line. That wasn't rare. Cell service dropped off hard out that way, but the operator sounded uneasy. "Just check it out," she said. "Mile marker 237, eastbound shoulder. The car's registered to a Thomas Ridley." I didn't know the guy, but the night had been dead slow, and I figured a quick tow would get me home sooner. So I pulled my jacket tight, grabbed my thermos of lukewarm coffee, and headed down the highway. The stretch between Hutchinson and Nickerson is long and empty. Miles of farmland, broken only by old windmills and fences half swallowed by weeds. The moon was full but veiled by thin clouds, enough light to wash everything in a pale, unreal glow. As I drove, I scanned the shoulder for any sign of headlights or hazard blinkers. Nothing. Just fields stretching endlessly in both directions. The air was cold enough that my breath fogged up the windshield if I exhaled too hard. I reached the marker and slowed down. About 50 yards off the road, I saw the glint of metal. A car. It looked like it had veered off and stopped at an odd angle, nose down into a shallow ditch. I flicked on my hazards, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out. The sound of gravel under my boots was the only thing breaking the stillness. The car was a dark blue Ford Taurus. The driver's side door hung open. That's when my stomach tightened a little. Doors left open in the middle of nowhere always meant trouble. I called out, "Hello? You all right in there?" But the night just threw my voice back at me. The air smelled faintly of burned rubber and something metallic. Blood, maybe, though it was faint. I crouched down, aimed my light across the interior. The keys were still in the ignition. The engine was off. No driver. But the seatbelt was twisted like someone had yanked it off in a hurry. I checked the ground around the car. There were footprints in the mud, boots men's size, leading away from the driver's side toward the open field. I followed them for a few steps. Then they just stopped. No turn, no change in stride. Just gone. I swept my flashlight around, trying to find where they picked up again, but the field was smooth and unbroken beyond that. It looked like he'd vanished into thin air. That was when I noticed the hood of the car. Deep dents ran across it. 3 long, parallel gouges that didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen. I'd pulled deer off bumpers before, and this wasn't that. These marks looked deliberate, almost claw-like, but spaced too far apart for a dog or coyote. I got a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I called dispatch. Hey, this car's empty. The driver's gone. They asked if maybe he'd gone for help. Doesn't look like it, I said. Footprints stop about 20 feet out. There's damage to the hood, too. Might want to send the sheriff. They said they'd notify the county. I didn't want to hang around, but I couldn't just leave the car either. So I set up the winch, hooked the cable to the frame, and started to reel it in. The engine on my rig groaned, the cable whined, and the Taurus inched out of the ditch. I kept glancing toward that field, though. Something about it felt wrong. It wasn't just empty. It felt like it was watching me back. Then I heard it. A faint sound, like someone breathing through clenched teeth. It came from behind the car. I killed the winch, and louder this time. Hey, sir, you out here? No answer. Just that low, ragged breathing. I moved my light toward the rear bumper. Nothing. I took a step closer, the mud sucking at my boots. The breathing stopped. Then the smell hit me, stronger this time, like rust and wet soil. I swung my flashlight toward the tree line, and that's when I saw it. A dark figure crouched low in the field, maybe 30 feet out. I thought it was a man at first, but it was too still, too angular. Its limbs seemed wrong, too long, the way a shadow stretches when a light's at the wrong angle. The beam caught its face for just a second, a flash of pale skin and eyes that glowed dull yellow before it jerked back out of sight. I froze. My mind scrambled for something logical. A deer, a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew I'd seen eyes that were too human to belong to anything else. I jumped back into my truck, locked the doors, and started the engine. The radio crackled, dispatch again, faint and warped. Sheriff's route, hold tight. That was all I caught before the static drowned it out. The headlights lit up the ditch, the trees, the empty stretch of field. Nothing moved. I told myself I'd wait for the sheriff. But every minute stretched longer, the silence growing heavier. I could feel something out there, just beyond the reach of the light. Watching. At 3:12 a.m., headlights appeared down the road. I almost laughed with relief. The sheriff's SUV pulled in behind me, crunching gravel. A tall man in a hat stepped out, flashlight in hand. Sheriff Dale Matthews. I'd met him before on a couple of late-night calls. He came up beside my door. You the one found the Taurus? Yeah, I said, trying to sound steadier than I felt. Driver's missing. Something tore up his hood, too. He nodded slowly. We got a report about half an hour ago. His wife said he called her first, said he'd hit something big. Then the line went dead. We've been trying to reach him since. He walked around the car, inspecting the marks. Jesus, he muttered. What the hell kind of animal leaves tracks like this? They're not tracks, I said quietly. They just stop. He gave me a look, half disbelief, half unease. Stay here, he said. I'm going to look around. He walked toward the field, light sweeping back and forth. I watched him go, the beam getting smaller until it flickered against the far grass. Then his light stopped moving. I leaned out the window. Sheriff? I called. No answer. Sheriff, you okay? The silence that came back was thick. My pulse kicked up hard. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down against every bit of common sense screaming at me not to. The cold air stung my face as I moved toward where his beam had gone out. Sheriff Matthews? I called again. Nothing. Then, faintly, I heard the click of a radio mic, static, then his voice, broken and low. Stay in the truck. I stopped dead. What? The radio cut again, replaced by something else, a sound that crawled under my skin. It was breathing, that same rasping, wet sound I'd heard earlier, only closer now, coming from my left. I swung the light, and it caught something pale, half hidden in the grass. A hand. The sheriff's, but it wasn't moving. I started backing up, my heart slamming against my ribs. Then the grass rippled, like something big was moving through it. Fast. I turned and ran. I barely made it to the truck when I felt the ground shudder behind me like something heavy had landed. I jumped in, slammed the door, threw it into gear, and tore off down the road, towing cable still dragging behind me, sparks flying. In the mirror, for a second, I saw it. A shape, tall, thin, almost spider-like, standing on the edge of the field, its head cocked to one side, watching me go. The yellow glow of its eyes followed me until the darkness swallowed it completely. I didn't stop until I hit town limits. I parked outside the diner, shaking so bad I couldn't light a cigarette. I called dispatch again, told them what happened. They said a search team was heading out at dawn. When the sun came up, I drove back with them. The Taurus was gone. So was the tow cable. They found the sheriff's flashlight half buried in the mud. No body, no sign of struggle, just deep gouges in the dirt, like something had been dragged toward the tree line. They never found Thomas Ridley either. I quit the towing job 2 days later, packed up and moved to Wichita, took a night shift at a warehouse. I still drive past empty fields sometimes, still see that kind of pale moonlight that makes everything feel wrong. And every now and then when I pull over to rest, I swear I hear breathing, low, ragged, waiting. I don't go back near Hutchinson anymore. Not after that night. Not after seeing something I can't explain standing out there in the dead of night, watching from the fields, waiting for another car to stop. Story the end. It was nearly midnight when I left the diner. The place sat on the edge of Route 12, a long stretch of cracked two-lane highway that cut through empty farmland and forest. I had worked the late shift as a short-order cook for the past 6 months, and by that point, the routine of closing up, washing the grill, locking the back door, walking across the quiet parking lot had become second nature. The air that night was cold and still, and the only sound came from a neon sign that buzzed faintly above the front windows. It was the kind of silence that made every small sound feel too loud, like the jingle of my keys or the crunch of gravel beneath my boots. My old pickup sat alone beneath the streetlight, its paint dulled by years of dirt and rust. As I reached the driver's side, I felt it then, that subtle, crawling feeling that someone was watching me. It wasn't a sound or movement that triggered it. It was instinct. I glanced toward the tree line beyond the diner's lot, but the darkness there was absolute, thick enough that it looked like a wall. I shook it off, unlocked the truck, and slid behind the wheel. The engine took a few tries to start. When it finally turned over, the headlights flickered weakly before cutting through the mist hanging low across the road. I took one last look at the diner. Every window dark except for the red glow of the neon sign reflected faintly on the glass, and pulled out onto Route 12. I'd driven that road hundreds of times. There were no towns for 30 miles, just an old gas station that had closed years back and a scattering of farmhouses hidden behind fields of corn or winter-barren soil. Most nights I enjoyed the solitude, but that night felt different. Something about the quiet unsettled me. I turned the radio on, flipping through static until I found an oldies station, just to fill the silence. 10 minutes into the drive, I passed the first curve in the road. My headlights swept across the trees, and for a brief second, I thought I saw someone standing on the shoulder. Tall, motionless, and pale. My heart jumped, and I instinctively slowed down, squinting into the darkness. But by the time I reached the spot, there was nothing there. Just weeds and cracked asphalt. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe fog, or a mailbox catching the beams. Still, I couldn't shake the unease crawling through me. I rolled the window down an inch, letting the night air in. That's when I noticed something strange. The world outside the truck was completely still. No wind, no crickets, no sound of engines in the distance. Even the hum of power lines seemed absent. The road stretched on endlessly, and I began to feel as if I was driving in circles. I knew that wasn't possible. Route 12 was a straight shot, but something about the scenery felt off. I passed an old wooden fence, then a bent road sign, then a patch of trees that looked too familiar. I glanced at my odometer. I'd been driving nearly 20 minutes, and yet it felt like I hadn't gotten anywhere. That's when I saw the diner's neon glow again. I slammed on the brakes. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared through the windshield. There it was, the same diner I'd just left, sitting on the right side of the road, its neon sign flickering above the door. For a long time, I just sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to make sense of it. I'd driven straight for miles. There was no way I'd turned around without realizing it. I slowly rolled forward, watching the diner pass by on my right. It looked identical, the same gravel lot, the same flickering sign, the same empty windows. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My pickup was still parked in the lot, the same rust, the same dent in the rear bumper. I hadn't been imagining it. There was another truck, my truck, sitting exactly where I had left it. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I pressed the gas, forcing myself to keep going, even though every instinct screamed at me to get out and look. I drove faster this time, my hands tight on the wheel, my eyes locked on the dark ribbon of road ahead. For a while, I didn't see anything. The world outside looked endless again. Trees, road, fog. But after a few minutes, I felt that the temperature in the cab drop sharply. My breath fogged in front of me, and the air smelled faintly of something metallic. I checked the heater. It was on full blast, but the air coming out was cold. That's when I heard the first knock. It came from the passenger side door, soft, deliberate, 3 times. I froze. The road was empty. I hadn't seen another car for nearly an hour. My eyes darted to the side mirror, but there was nothing there. Just blackness. Then it came again. 3 slow, even knocks. I told myself it had to be something loose rattling against the door, maybe a branch or road debris. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The sound was too controlled, too human. I forced myself to look to my right. Someone was sitting in the passenger seat. I didn't see him appear. He was just suddenly there. A man, maybe in his 40s, wearing a soaked flannel shirt and dark jeans. His face was pale and drawn tight, like the skin had been stretched over the bones. His hair clung wetly to his forehead, and his eyes, they were wide open, glassy, unblinking. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding sideways on the slick pavement. When it stopped, the seat beside me was empty. I gasped for air, my pulse hammering in my ears. The windshield fogged over from my breath. I wiped it with my sleeve, staring out into the mist. There was no one on the road, no one in the truck. I sat there for what felt like forever, gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers ached. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation, maybe. I'd worked 3 double shifts that week, barely getting 5 hours of rest between. I started the truck again and kept driving. But something had changed. The road felt wrong now, narrower, darker. The yellow lines were gone. I rolled my window down again, and the smell hit me. Decay, rot, wet earth. I gagged and looked out the window, but instead of trees, there was nothing but tall grass stretching into the fog. It waved faintly, though there was no wind. Then I saw movement, figures, dozens of them, standing in the grass on either side of the truck. They weren't walking or shifting. They were just there, facing the road, facing me. Their silhouettes were faint through the mist, but I could make out arms, legs, and pale faces. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel tighter, refusing to slow down. The radio suddenly cut to static. It blared so loud I jumped, twisting the dial to shut it off. But the noise didn't stop. It grew louder, filling the cab with a shrill, distorted hiss that made my teeth ache. I slammed the side of the console, finally yanking the cord from the dashboard. The sound cut off abruptly. When I looked up, the road had ended. The asphalt simply stopped, swallowed by the fog ahead. I hit the brakes again, the tires screeching against the pavement. My headlights revealed a chain-link fence across the road, with a rusted sign hanging crookedly from one post. I squinted to read it. U.S. Route 12, closed since 1989. That wasn't possible. I'd been driving this road every night for months. I got out, my boots crunching on the gravel. The night air was freezing now, colder than it should have been in late September. The fog was so thick I could barely see past the fence. Behind me, the truck's headlights flickered, and then I heard the sound again. Soft footsteps on the asphalt, coming from behind. I turned slowly. A man was walking toward me, the same man from the passenger seat. His wet clothes clung to his body, and his head tilted slightly as he approached. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. Just walked slowly until he was about 10 feet away. I backed up until I hit the fence. "What do you want?" I yelled, but my voice came out weak. He stopped. Then, in a voice that didn't sound entirely human, like it came from somewhere deeper, almost hollow, he said, "You shouldn't have left." The fog around us thickened. I turned back toward the truck, but when I did, the headlights went out. Everything went dark. When I woke up, it was morning. My truck was parked on the shoulder of Route 12, a few miles from the diner. The road was normal again, empty but familiar. My watch said I'd been gone for 7 hours. The fence was gone, the sign was gone, everything was exactly how it should be. I told the sheriff what happened, half expecting him to laugh it off, but he just stared at me for a long time, then asked me to describe the man I saw. When I finished, he got quiet. Finally, he said, "You're not the first person to see him." He told me that in 1989, a man had been killed in a wreck on Route 12, right before the stretch of road was closed off for reconstruction. The truck he was driving skidded out in heavy rain, and he drowned when the cab flooded with water from a nearby ditch. They reopened that road years later, but people still claim to see him, standing by the roadside or sometimes appearing in the passenger seat of passing cars. I quit my job that week. I couldn't bring myself to drive that way again. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm on an empty road and the radio starts to hum with static, I swear I can smell that same metallic air. I don't look to my right anymore, because if I do, I might see him sitting there again, watching me drive toward the same place I'll never escape. Story the end. I was living alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of Des Moines, Iowa, in late January. The kind of winter that bites through layers of clothing and makes the city streets look empty even during the day. I worked nights at a 24-hour convenience store, stocking shelves and manning the counter, which left me alone in my apartment during the day and awake when everyone else was asleep. I had grown used to the solitude, even found comfort in it, until that week. It started on a Tuesday night. I got home around 3:15 a.m., the streets slick with melting snow, the air cold enough to make the headlights from passing cars refract like long white streaks across the ice. I slipped inside my building, unlocked the door, and stepped into the dark hallway. The fluorescent light flickered faintly as I passed, throwing long shadows across the cracked linoleum. I set my keys down on the counter and boiled water for coffee, a habit to keep myself awake while unpacking. That's when I noticed it. The apartment door across the hall was slightly ajar. I didn't live near anyone else. The building was mostly empty because it was winter. I knew that. The door shouldn't have been open. My curiosity pushed me toward it, but when I peeked inside, nothing seemed out of place. Just the faint hum of the heater, the empty living room, the shadowed corners. I shrugged it off, muttering to myself about drafty buildings, then went back to making coffee. By 3:45 a.m., I was in my living room, scrolling on my phone, trying to unwind. The apartment was cold, unusually so. My heating vents weren't even blowing air. Then I heard it. The sound of someone pacing in the hallway. Step, steps, pause. Step, step, step. I froze. My apartment was on the second floor, the hallway outside narrow. Footsteps shouldn't carry that clearly at that hour. I told myself it was probably one of the maintenance guys, though why they'd be wandering around at this hour, I couldn't guess. I stood up, creeping to the door. The steps stopped. I leaned my ear against the crack, hearing only the faint hum of the refrigerator. I opened the door just a sliver. The hallway stretched empty in both directions. The apartment across from mine was closed, as it should be. No one there. I turned back inside, shaking my head. I poured coffee, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. That's when I noticed the bedroom door behind me had been closed. I'm certain I left it open. I walked over slowly, my hand brushing the doorknob. It was ice cold, which was weird because I had the heater running. I opened it, and the bed looked wrong. The blanket was perfectly smooth, except for a faint imprint. Someone had been lying there. I backed away and flicked on the light. Nothing. The imprint was gone. I stepped closer, running my hands along the blanket. Empty. I told myself it had to be a dream. I was exhausted. I poured another cup of coffee, sitting down on the couch to let my mind settle. Then I heard it, a whisper so low I almost didn't recognize it as a voice. "Why are you awake?" I bolted upright, spinning toward the bedroom. Empty. The window was closed, curtains drawn. My phone, which had been on the coffee table, slid slightly on its own, as if nudged by something unseen. I left the lights on and tried to go to sleep anyway. Around 4 a.m., I woke to the sound of breathing, slow, deliberate, coming from the corner of the living room. I didn't dare look. The air grew heavier with every breath I took. My heart raced. Then a shadow moved across the far wall, low and slithering. I grabbed my jacket and keys and ran down the stairwell, into the bitter cold, leaving the door open. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 20 minutes away, where fluorescent lights made everything seem safe, sterile. I called my friend to come get me. We returned later that morning. My apartment was normal. Lights worked, no traces of anyone having been inside. But when I stepped into the bedroom, I noticed the blanket again, smooth, unwrinkled. Except now, faint muddy footprints led from the window to the bed. I moved immediately after that night. I rented a room in a friend's house, refused to spend another night alone. But even months later, I'd wake up at exactly 3:15 a.m., gasping, cold, feeling watched. One night in my new apartment, I woke up at that exact time. The air was still, too still. Then I saw it, reflected in my phone screen. A dark shape standing just beyond my bedroom door, head tilted slightly to one side, watching me. I blinked. It was gone. I haven't slept well since. Sometimes, when I leave the apartment to get groceries or work late nights, I swear I can feel eyes on me, faint but heavy in the shadows. And every now and then, when I glance at a window or a mirror, I catch a fleeting silhouette, tall, thin, motionless. I've learned not to ask questions, not to look too closely. I've learned to leave the lights on. I've learned never to sleep without a phone in my hand, even if it doesn't help. Because some nights, even months later, I still hear that whisper, "Why are you awake?" Story the end. It was nearly 1 a.m. when I turned off Highway 81 onto the back road that led to my aunt's cabin. The rain had finally let up, leaving the asphalt slick and the surrounding fields shrouded in fog. I had been driving for hours straight from Richmond, and every mile felt longer than the last. The road was narrow, flanked by trees that arched overhead, forming a tunnel of darkness. I wasn't expecting anyone else to be on that road at this hour. The only lights were my headlights cutting through the mist, the occasional reflective sign flashing as I passed. My phone had no signal, my GPS flickered, and a sense of isolation wrapped around me like a thick blanket. As I rounded a sharp curve, I noticed her. A woman, standing in the middle of the lane, completely still. She wore a long white dress, drenched and clinging to her frame, hair plastered over her face. I slammed on the brakes, tires skidding on wet asphalt like coming to a stop just a few feet from her. For a second, she didn't move. Then her head lifted slowly, revealing her eyes, dark, hollow, and unfocused. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came. I sat frozen, hands gripping the wheel, heart hammering. Then instinct took over. I swerved sharply to the right shoulder, tires kicking up mud, and drove past her. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. She wasn't there. Shaking, I kept driving. The trees pressed in closer, shadows thickening under the dim glow of my headlights. My stomach churned, my pulse raced. I told myself I had imagined it. Tiredness, stress, the empty road. But deep down, I knew what I saw was real. About 10 minutes later, I reached a small rest area. I pulled over, trying to calm down. The lot was empty except for a lone sedan, parked near the edge, engine off. The air smelled damp and earthy, heavy with the fog that had settled. I got out, stretching and trying to shake the feeling of being watched. I grabbed a soda from the vending machine and leaned against my car, taking deep breaths. The night was silent, too silent, not even the rustle of leaves. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate tapping coming from the top of my car. I froze. The hair on my arms stood on end. I turned, expecting someone to be there, but the lot was empty. The sedan's windows reflected the dim lights, but no one was inside. I rushed back to the driver's seat, locking the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the car. As I drove off, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw her reflection in the back window. Standing upright, face hidden beneath dripping hair, arms limp at her sides. Then she was gone. The rest of the drive was a blur. Every shadow in the trees seemed alive. Every gust of wind against the car felt like her presence. I didn't dare slow down until I reached the town near my aunt's cabin. When I finally parked, I noticed something on my back window. A handprint. Small, wet, smeared across the glass. My heart sank. I hadn't stopped since leaving the rest area. No one could have touched my car. I went inside, locked every door and window, and tried to sleep. But that night and every night since, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes when I drive alone at night, I see her standing at the edge of the road, waiting, her dress soaked, hair covering her face, eyes hollow and dark. And I remember the tapping, always the tapping, on the roof, the windows, following me no matter how fast I drive. I know I'll never be alone on that road again. Story the end. It was one of those nights where the darkness seemed heavier than usual, the kind that pressed against the windows and made the air feel too still. Alex was driving home from his late shift at the diner, a 20-minute route that cut through an old stretch of road just outside of town. It was past 2 a.m., and the world felt empty. No cars, no lights, just the hum of the engine and the rhythmic click of the blinker when he turned onto County Road 9. He'd driven that road dozens of times before. It was flat, surrounded by nothing but cornfields that went on forever, swaying in the dark like something alive. But that night, something felt off. The fog hung low, and his headlights only illuminated a few feet ahead. The world beyond it disappeared into thick gray. About 5 miles in, Alex saw something on the side of the road. A person. He slowed the car. A woman stood just beyond the fog line, barefoot, wearing what looked like a thin hospital gown. Her long hair clung to her face as she stared down the road, motionless. Alex's first thought was that maybe she'd been in an accident or escaped from somewhere. He hesitated, rolling down his window an inch. "Hey, are you okay?" She didn't respond. He put the car in park and leaned out, squinting through the fog. "Ma'am, do you need help?" That's when she turned toward him. Her movements were wrong, slow, jerky, as if her limbs didn't quite obey. Her head tilted to one side, and even in the low light he could see that her eyes were pitch black. Not just the pupils. Everything. A chill ran down Alex's spine. He slammed the window up and locked the doors. The woman began walking toward the car, barefoot on gravel, each step deliberate. He threw the car in drive and hit the gas. The tires spun before gripping, and the car shot forward. His heart pounded as he glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, she stood in the middle of the road, watching him. Then she started running. Fast. Too fast. Alex floored it. The speedometer climbed 60, 70, 80. But when he looked back again, she was gone. By the time he reached the town limits, his hands were shaking. He pulled into the parking lot of a closed gas station and tried to calm down, convincing himself it was fatigue, maybe a trick of the fog. But when he stepped out to light a cigarette, he noticed something on the back window. Handprints. Smudged and wet, like someone had pressed their palms against the glass. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, he told his coworker Jordan about what happened. Jordan laughed it off. "Man, that's the old Route 9 story. Everyone around here knows it. They say a girl died out there back in the 80s. Hit and run. People claim to see her when it's foggy." Alex frowned. "I didn't just see her, Jordan. She followed me." Jordan's grin faded when he realized Alex wasn't joking. "All right, dude. Chill. It's probably just someone messing with you." That night, Alex promised himself he'd take the highway instead, even if it was longer. He worked late again, clocking out close to 1:30 a.m., and started home with coffee in hand. The drive was calm at first, music low, headlights cutting through another wave of fog. But when he passed the intersection that connected to County Road 9, his radio cut out. Static. Then his phone vibrated, unknown number. He shouldn't have answered, but the ringtone sounded too loud in the quiet car. "Hello?" No one spoke at first. Then a woman's voice whispered, low and broken, "You left me on the road." Alex's blood ran cold. Who is this? Static. Then the same voice, closer. "You should have stopped." He hung up, heart pounding, and threw the phone onto the passenger seat. It started ringing again immediately. He ignored it. But the ringtone tone didn't stop. It just kept going, echoing through the car even after he turned off the phone completely. The lights on the dash began to flicker. Then, without warning, the headlights went out. Pitch black. Alex slammed the brakes. The car skidded, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. When it stopped, everything was silent. He reached for his phone, trying to use the flashlight, but before he could turn it on, something hit the window. Hard. A pale face pressed against the glass. The same woman, eyes like two black holes, mouth open wider than any human's should be. She whispered, "You saw me." Alex screamed and floored it. The tires burned rubber as he tore down the road. The fog swallowed her completely, and for a while there was nothing but the sound of the engine and his ragged breathing. He made it home, shaking, slamming the door behind him and locking every window. But the nightmares began that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face against the glass. He started waking up at exactly 3:03 a.m., drenched in sweat, heart pounding. He'd check his phone, and every time there'd be a new message from that same unknown number. Why didn't you stop? You saw me. You left me there. One night, he woke to find his bedroom light flickering. His phone lay on the nightstand, screen glowing even though he hadn't touched it. A video message was waiting. He pressed play. It showed his car idling on County Road 9, headlights barely cutting through the fog. He was sitting inside, staring straight ahead, eyes wide open. But the woman was standing beside the car, right next to him, staring into the window. Alex dropped the phone. His breath came in shallow bursts. He stumbled to the living room and turned on every light. He didn't sleep. The next morning, he called the police. They checked the footage, but the video was gone, not deleted, just gone, no trace of it. That night, he stayed with Jordan, not wanting to be alone. They fell asleep on the couch watching TV. Sometime around 3 a.m., the power went out. Jordan groaned. Probably a breaker, he mumbled. But when Alex looked toward the window, he saw her again, standing outside, head tilted, watching. Don't move, he whispered. Jordan sat up. What? Before Alex could stop him, Jordan walked toward the window. Who the hell? The glass shattered. Jordan screamed as something yanked him backward into the darkness. Alex rushed forward, but there was nothing outside. No body. Just fog. He called 911, voice shaking so bad the dispatcher could barely understand him. When the police arrived, they found no signs of forced entry, no footprints in the mud. Just shattered glass and 2 sets of wet handprints on the window, one large, one small. Jordan was never found. Alex moved away a week later. He couldn't handle the nights, the fog, or the sound of tapping on the windows that came every time the clock hit 3:03. He thought putting miles between himself and that road would help. But one night, months later, while driving home in another state, his phone lit up with an unknown number. He stared at it for a long time, his stomach twisting. Against his better judgment, he answered. A whisper came through the speaker, soft, broken, familiar. You shouldn't have left me there. Static. Then silence. He looked in the rearview mirror. Through the fog, creeping over the road behind him, a pale figure stood at the edge of the headlights, watching. Story the end. It was close to 2:30 a.m. when I woke up, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like I'd been running. The power had gone out sometime in the night, and my phone screen was the only glow in the room. I lived alone in a small rental home just outside a quiet Ohio town, one of those old, creaky places built in the early 1900s, with drafty windows and floors that groaned under every step. I don't know what woke me exactly, but the air felt wrong. Too still, too heavy, like the entire house was holding its breath. Then I heard it, the faint sound of a door hinge creaking open somewhere downstairs. I froze. I didn't have pets. I didn't have roommates. For a long minute, I stayed perfectly still, straining to listen. Nothing but silence. I reached over and grabbed the flashlight I kept on my nightstand, flicking it on. The pale beam cut across the bedroom. Everything was as I'd left it. The half-empty glass of water, the pile of laundry by the chair, the curtains fluttering slightly in the faint breeze from the cracked window. Then came the sound again, soft, deliberate footsteps moving across the old wooden floor below me. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought maybe someone had broken in, but I lived too far out for anyone to stumble onto the property by accident. And who would break into a house with no lights on, in the middle of nowhere, at this hour? The footsteps stopped. I waited. Then they started again, only this time slower, cautious, like whoever it was trying not to be heard. I picked up my phone and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal. I'd had bad service before, but never complete dead air. That's when I noticed the faint sound of breathing. It wasn't mine. It was deep, slow, coming from somewhere down the hall. The air in my throat froze as I swung the flashlight toward the doorway. Nothing. The hallway stretched empty, the shadows long and uneven, but the breathing was still there, closer. I stood up, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, and crept toward the door. The floorboards moaned under my feet, and with every step, the breathing grew louder. When I reached the top of the stairs, the light flickered for just a second, and I swear I saw something move at the bottom, a shadow stepping out of view. I called out, my voice trembling, "Who's there?" No answer, just silence thick enough to choke on. I started backing away, but the light flickered again, and I saw it. A figure, standing at the foot of the stairs. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its head almost brushed the ceiling. Its face was wrong. There weren't features exactly, just impressions of where a mouth and eyes should have been, stretched and smooth like melted wax. I couldn't move. I just stared as it tilted its head, slow and deliberate, as if studying me. Then, in a voice that sounded like someone trying to remember how to speak, it whispered my name. That broke me. I ran back into the bedroom, slammed the door, and shoved the dresser against it. My hands shook so badly I could barely keep hold of the flashlight. For a few minutes, I just listened. No footsteps, no breathing. I started thinking maybe it was all in my head, that I'd dreamed it or imagined the whole thing. Then the doorknob turned. I froze. The sound of metal scraping against metal filled the air as something slowly, deliberately twisted the knob. The dresser creaked as pressure pressed against the door, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. After what felt like forever, I turned off the flashlight and sat in complete darkness, barely breathing. My phone still had no signal. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually I must have dozed off because I woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains. When I pushed the dresser away, the door opened easily. I checked the house from top to bottom. Every door locked, every window shut. Nothing out of place. It should have ended there, but it didn't. That night, around the same time, I heard it again. The breathing, low and deliberate, right outside my bedroom door. My phone, once again, had no service, and the flashlight, when I turned it on, flickered like it was struggling to stay alive. This time, I didn't move. I just sat up in bed, clutching the flashlight, listening. The breathing got closer until it sounded like it was right beside me. Then a whisper, soft and broken. "Don't move." Something cold brushed against my hand. I swung the flashlight wildly, and for the briefest second I saw it again. The same stretched, faceless figure crouched beside the bed. Then it vanished into the shadows. I don't remember leaving the house. The next thing I knew, I was standing outside barefoot in the yard, the early morning air biting at my skin. I moved out that same week. The landlord didn't seem surprised when I told him I was leaving. He didn't even ask why. As I was loading the last box into my car, I asked him if anyone had ever reported anything strange about the place. He paused, hands in his pockets, and said quietly, "You heard it too, huh?" Then he just turned and walked away. I still don't sleep through the night anymore. Every time the power flickers or the house creaks, I feel that same cold air, that same whisper breathing against my ear in the dark. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear it, my name, drawn out slow, like it's reminding me that I never really left. Story, the end. It was just after 2:40 a.m. when Mark Reynolds woke to the faint hum of his living room ceiling fan. He lived alone in a modest two-story home in Youngstown, Ohio, and the night outside was unusually still. No cars passed on the street, no wind rattled the trees, just silence, thick and heavy. Mark lay in bed, heart pounding, convinced he had heard something else, a soft, deliberate tapping coming from somewhere deep in the house. He sat up slowly, ears straining. Max, his German Shepherd mix, stirred at the foot of the bed, low growl rumbling from his throat. "Easy, boy," Mark whispered, though his own voice trembled. The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was only the hum of the fan and Max's labored breathing. Then a new sound, a faint scraping, slow and uneven, as if fingernails or claws were dragging across the wooden floor somewhere below. Mark's pulse jumped. He grabbed the flashlight from his nightstand and slipped out of bed, Max immediately following, growling softly. Every instinct screamed for him to stay put, but the sound was coming closer, moving toward the stairs. He approached the top of the staircase and shone the flashlight down. The beam illuminated the dark living room. Nothing moved. The shadows were long, stretching across the floor like the fingers of something enormous. And then he saw it. A figure standing by the couch, perfectly still. Tall, dark, head slightly tilted, features obscured in shadow. Its coat looked wet, though the room was dry, and its presence seemed to suck the air out of the space, cold and oppressive. Mark's throat went dry. He whispered, "Who's there?" No response. Only the quiet scrape of shoes, or was it feet hovering slightly above the floor against the carpet? The figure shifted slightly, just enough for Mark to see the glint of its eyes in the beam of the flashlight. They were dark, reflective, empty, yet somehow intelligent. And then the voice came, soft, low, and rasping, like it had crawled through the walls themselves. "You shouldn't be awake." Mark stumbled back, heart hammering. Max barked, then whimpered, tail tucked between his legs. Mark bolted for the bedroom, slamming the door and locking it. He shoved the dresser against the handle, gripping the flashlight as if it were a weapon. Minutes stretched like hours. The figure's presence didn't leave. The whisper came again, now directly outside the bedroom door. "You can't leave. Not at night." Mark pressed himself against the dresser, sweat running down his face, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally rose, he opened the door cautiously. The living room looked exactly as it had before. The couch, the rug, the small coffee table, untouched. The windows were closed and locked. No footprints, no wet marks, no signs that anyone had entered. Mark didn't sleep in that house again. He moved across the state, he changed jobs, and never stayed in one place long enough to feel safe. But every night around 2:43 a.m., he feels it return, the cold presence, the faint scraping on the floor, the whisper just beyond the walls. You can't leave at night. He has learned not to test it. He never opens doors after dark. He doesn't look out the windows. And still, he waits every night for the moment it comes, because it always does. Story the end. It was close to 2:30 in the morning when I first realized something was wrong with the house across the street. I'd been sitting in my living room, trying to unwind after a long double shift at the hospital, sipping the last of a beer while half watching an old rerun of The Twilight Zone. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet, the kind that only happens in the dead of night when everyone's asleep and even the streetlights hum faintly. I lived alone in a modest ranch-style house in a small town in upstate New York. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet, safe, and usually predictable. That night, though, the silence felt heavy. I remember glancing out my front window without thinking much about it, just an idle glance when I saw the light. It was faint at first, just a warm flicker from the upstairs window of the house across the street. The Donovans' place. They'd moved away months ago after a family tragedy, a car accident that killed their teenage son. The place had been empty ever since, listed for sale but never bought. So when I saw that faint orange glow, my first thought was that squatters had gotten inside. The flicker reminded me of candlelight. It shifted and wavered, sometimes dimming completely before flaring up again. I stood there for a while, staring through the blinds, debating whether to call the cops or just ignore it. But curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my jacket, pulled on my shoes, and stepped outside. The cold hit me instantly. The neighborhood was dead still, the only sound the crunch of gravel under my boots as I crossed the street. The Donovan's house loomed ahead, dark except for that single window on the second floor. The rest of the place looked abandoned. Paint peeling, grass overgrown, a for sale sign half fallen against the mailbox. As I reached the curb, the light in the window vanished. I stopped, squinting up at the house. Every window was dark now. For a few seconds, I just stood there, listening. I could have sworn I heard movement, a soft shuffle like someone walking across carpet, then silence again. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe I'd imagined it. I was exhausted. But then I heard it, the faint creak of the front door opening. The door slowly drifted inward, just a few inches, and then stopped. My stomach tightened. Every rational part of my brain told me to turn around, go back inside, and lock my door. But I didn't. I walked up the path, heart pounding in my chest. The front porch steps groaned under my weight. I called out quietly, "Hello, is anyone in there?" No answer. I pushed the door gently. It creaked open, revealing the dark, empty living room inside. The smell hit me immediately. Dust, mildew, something faintly metallic underneath it all. The air was cold. My breath hung in front of me as I stepped inside. The house hadn't changed much since the Donovans left. Furniture still sat covered in white sheets, their son's old basketball trophies lined up along a shelf. Everything looked frozen in time. I pulled out my phone, turning on the flashlight. That's when I noticed the footprints. They started at the base of the stairs, muddy, barefoot prints that led upward. The dirt looked fresh, wet, as if someone had just walked in from outside. I followed the trail slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. Halfway up the stairs, I heard it. A soft sound, like breathing. Not mine. I froze, listening. The sound came from the second floor, from the hallway above. Slow, labored breaths, followed by a faint dragging sound. I should have left right then. I knew that. But something about the way that sound echoed through the house, like it was both near and impossibly far, made me climb the rest of the stairs. My flashlight beam trembled as I reached the top. The hallway was long and narrow, lined with doors. Most were closed, except for the one at the end, the door to the Donovan son's old room, the same window I'd seen the light in. As I stepped closer, the air grew colder. I could see my breath fogging the beam of my flashlight. The breathing sound had stopped, replaced by a faint scratching, like nails against wood. "Hello?" I whispered. My voice cracked. "Who's there?" No reply. I took another step. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then went dark. My stomach dropped. I slapped the side of the phone, trying to get the light back, but it stayed dead. The only illumination now came from the faint moonlight leaking in through the upstairs window. That's when I saw him. A figure standing in the doorway at the end of the hall, motionless, just a silhouette against the pale light from the window. I couldn't make out his face, but I knew he was staring at me. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The air was so cold it burned my throat. I took one step backward, and the floor creaked beneath my weight. The figure moved. He didn't walk so much as twitch. A sudden jerking movement forward, then still again, then another, closer each time. The sound that came from him wasn't right. It was like a wet, stuttering gasp mixed with a low groan. I turned and bolted down the stairs. My foot slipped halfway down and I crashed into the wall, scraping my arm, but I didn't stop. I ran through the living room and out the open front door, nearly tripping as I hit the yard. When I reached my porch across the street, I turned back. The house was dark again. No light, no sound, no movement. I stood there for a long time, chest heaving, staring at the house. After a while, I convinced myself that it had been a dream, that I was overtired, that maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing. I went back inside and locked every door and window. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I walked back over in the daylight just to prove to myself that nothing had happened. The front door was closed this time, locked tight. Through the window, I could see the living room exactly as it had been, dusty, undisturbed. But there was something new on the porch, a wet footprint, bare, human, facing my house. I told myself it had to be a prank, maybe some kid in the neighborhood messing around. Still, I called the local police just to be safe. They came by later that day, took a look around, and told me the place was sealed up. No signs of forced entry, no footprints inside. They said I probably saw a light reflection, maybe from a car passing. I tried to believe that. That night, I went to bed early, determined to get some rest. But just as I was drifting off, I heard it, a soft tap against my bedroom window. I froze. Another tap. I turned my head slowly toward the window. The blinds were drawn, but I could see a faint orange glow leaking through them, the same flickering light from the night before. My mouth went dry. I got out of bed, every step feeling heavier than the last, and pulled the blinds open. The house across the street was lit up again. The upstairs window glowed orange, and in front of it, a figure stood. It was staring directly at my house. I backed away from the window and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. While the dispatcher spoke, I glanced toward the front door and froze. My doormat was soaked. Water pooled around it, seeping into the hardwood. There was a knock, not on the door, on the inside of the door. I dropped the phone. The line was still open, the dispatcher's voice faintly asking if I was safe. I backed into the kitchen, eyes locked on the entryway. The knocking came again, slow, deliberate. Then silence. I waited, heart pounding, until I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Relief flooded through me. But before they arrived, before I could even breathe again, I saw something that still makes my blood run cold. A wet, barefoot print appeared on the floor. Just one, moving slowly from the door toward the hallway. Then another. And another. I stood frozen as the prints led deeper into my house, toward the hallway, toward the back bedroom, the one with no windows. When the police arrived minutes later, the house was empty. The prints were gone, the floor dry. They told me again that I must have been imagining it, that stress and exhaustion could cause strange perceptions. I didn't argue. I moved out the next day. I never went back to that neighborhood. But 2 weeks later, while scrolling through local news, I saw a photo that made my skin crawl. The headline read, "Former Donovan residence burns in unexplained fire." The picture showed the house engulfed in flames, and in the upstairs window, faintly visible through the smoke, was a shadow, human-shaped, standing still, watching. The fire chief said it started upstairs, likely from an open flame, a candle maybe. But the house had no power, no utilities, and according to records, no one had entered it for months. I still don't light candles anymore. And I never, ever look out my window after midnight, because sometimes when the night is still enough, I swear I can see that faint orange flicker again, dancing somewhere out there in the dark. Story the end. It was around 1:45 a.m. when Mark finally pulled into the driveway of his small rental house in rural Kentucky. He'd been driving for hours after a long shift at the manufacturing plant, the kind of job that leaves your body sore and your mind numb. The roads were empty, nothing but fields and patches of woods stretching out into the darkness. The kind of night where the world feels paused, holding its breath. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, dropping his keys onto the counter. The house was quiet, too quiet, but that was normal for this place. Single story, isolated, the only neighbors a half-mile down the gravel road. Mark went to the bedroom, tossing his bag onto the bed, and tried to sleep. Around 3:02 a.m., he woke to the faint sound of tapping. At first, he thought it was the wind, maybe a loose shutter banging against the siding. But the sound was too deliberate. 3 slow, precise knocks. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the back door. Mark froze, his pulse racing. The door was locked. Nobody should be outside. Not at this hour. Not anywhere. He gripped his phone and leaned quietly toward the kitchen, peering through the small window next to the door. Nothing. The backyard was pitch black, and the wind was dead still. He could just make out the edges of the deck, slick from earlier rain. His stomach twisted. Maybe it was an animal, he told himself. Maybe a raccoon or something. But instinctively, he knew it wasn't. The knocking started again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Then 3 more knocks in perfect rhythm. Mark's hands shook as he fumbled with the deadbolt, confirming it was locked. The knocks stopped. Silence. But then, footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps pacing across the deck. He could hear them faintly over the sound of his own heartbeat. They didn't stop, they didn't vary, just a steady pace back and forth. Mark grabbed the nearest object, a metal flashlight, and crept toward the window. He pressed his face close to the glass. Nothing. He exhaled shakily, backing away. "Get a grip," he whispered. "It's nothing. Just your imagination." Then the doorknob rattled. Not a shake, not a jostle, a deliberate turn, controlled. Mark's blood ran cold. The door was locked. He could see it in front of him, and yet the knob was turning. He dropped to the floor and crawled back to the bedroom, phone in hand, 911. He dialed, barely able to speak. "Someone's at my back door," he stammered. "I don't know what to do. Please, hurry." The dispatcher's calm voice tried to soothe him, telling him to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and wait for the officers. Minutes passed. Too many. The footsteps continued, circling, pacing, back and forth. Then silence. Mark strained to listen. Nothing. The air was still, heavy, suffocating. He peeked through the blinds, heart in his throat. Empty. No footprints. No one. The police arrived minutes later. They searched the property, the surrounding woods, and even the neighboring fields. Nothing. They told him maybe it had been an animal or the wind. But one older officer, a man with lines etched deep into his face, lingered at the back door and said quietly, "Some folks around here see things like that sometimes. Best thing is to keep the lights on." Mark didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room and lights blazing, listening. The next night it happened again. Same time, same rhythm, 3 taps, tap, tap, tap. The pacing returned. This time Mark didn't move. He just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. Hours passed. Nothing else happened. He began to think maybe it was over. Then, sometime after 4 a.m., he woke to the faint smell of damp earth. It wasn't coming from the windows, not from the vents. It was inside the house. He sat up and saw it. A figure standing in the corner of his bedroom. Tall, thin, featureless in the dark, head tilted unnaturally. Its arms hung at its sides, impossibly long, fingers brushing the floor. Mark couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He just stared. The figure didn't speak. It didn't move. It just stood there watching. After what felt like forever, it tilted its head further and then vanished. Not fading into the shadows, just gone. Mark left that apartment the next morning. He didn't care about the lease or the deposit. He drove hours away, finding a cheap motel in a nearby town, but even there, he couldn't escape it. That night, as he lay on the bed, exhausted and trembling, he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. 3 soft knocks, coming from the window. He froze, and in the darkness beyond the glass, he swore he saw it, tall, thin, head tilted, just standing there, watching. Mark didn't sleep again that night. He hasn't stayed in one place longer than a week since. Every night around the same hour, the tapping starts. He's tried ignoring it, tried leaving, tried staying awake until sunrise, but it always comes back. 3 slow taps, tap, tap, tap. And sometimes, if he's not careful, he catches it moving inside the shadows. Story the end. It was close to 2 a.m. when I pulled off Highway 52 into a small unlit gas station in rural Kentucky. I had been driving for hours, the monotonous stretch of 2-lane asphalt stretching endlessly into the darkness behind me. My eyes were dry and heavy, my mind fuzzy from fatigue and coffee. I figured I'd take a quick break, fill up the tank, grab a soda, and be back on the road. The station looked abandoned at first glance. The fluorescent lights above the pumps flickered weakly, casting a sickly yellow glow. There was a small convenience store in the corner, its door slightly ajar, the bell above it silent. One old sedan sat parked near the far pump. I noticed movement inside the store, a figure standing behind the counter, but the lights were so dim I couldn't make out any details. I stepped out of the car, my shoes crunching on the gravel, and walked inside. The air smelled of dust, stale coffee, and something faintly metallic. The man behind the counter didn't move. He didn't even blink when I said hello. His face was pale, sunken, and his eyes had that strange glazed look like he hadn't slept or been alive for a long time. I need some gas, I said, my voice trembling slightly. He just nodded without a word and reached for the register. I noticed the display inside was old, the numbers faded and crooked, almost unreadable. I handed him a 20, and he accepted it without taking his eyes off me. I left quickly, fumbling with my car keys. As I climbed in, I glanced up at the dark pumps and froze. There she was, a woman, standing at the edge of the lot under the shadows of the flickering lights. She wore a long, wet dress that clung to her body, soaked through, and her hair hung in tangled strands over her face. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were completely black. I swallowed hard and started the car. She didn't move. She didn't run. She just stood there, watching. I floored it down the gravel driveway, tires skidding. The road ahead seemed longer than it should have, the dark trees looming closer with each passing second. Then I saw her again, closer, now standing in the middle of the road, blocking my headlights. I slammed on the brakes and swerved, narrowly missing her. My hands shook violently as I gripped the wheel. I looked in the rearview mirror. She wasn't behind me. I forced myself to drive again, but no matter how far I went, I kept catching glimpses of her in shadows along the roadside. Every curve, every bend, she appeared closer, always standing, always watching. By 3 a.m., I was panicked. My phone had no signal, the radio just static, and the road seemed endless. The night had turned unnaturally quiet. No wind, no birds, nothing but the hum of the tires and my own labored breathing. Then I heard it. A faint tapping on the roof of the car. I froze. My eyes darted around, scanning the dark, tree-lined road. The tapping continued, slow, deliberate. I didn't dare get out to look. I just pressed the accelerator to the floor and prayed the road would never end. A few miles later, I finally saw the glow of a gas station ahead, an actual modern one this time. Relief washed over me as I pulled in, my hands trembling so badly I could barely turn off the engine. I sat there for several minutes trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination. Fatigue, stress, imagination. That had to be it. I got out to fill the tank and the attendant gave me a friendly smile. I mumbled something about a long drive, trying to shake off the memory. But then I noticed something on the roof of my car. A handprint. Small, wet, smeared across the metal like someone had pressed it there just moments ago. My heart jumped into my throat. I looked around. The lot was empty, except for the attendant, who was staring at me with concern. I rubbed at the handprint frantically, but it wouldn't come off. That night, when I finally made it home, I locked every door and window. I tried to sleep, but the tapping returned, faint at first, then louder, like someone pacing on the roof above my bedroom. I didn't sleep, not a wink. Weeks later, I called the gas station in Kentucky to see if anyone had reported a strange woman standing in the lot. I wanted to know if someone had been messing with drivers like me. The voice on the other end was flat, monotone. "There's been nothing there for years," the woman said. "That station's been closed and abandoned since '92. We demolished it. Nobody goes out there anymore." I hung up, hands shaking. And ever since, whenever I drive alone at night, I swear I can see her standing at the edge of the road, waiting for me. Story, the end. It started with the hum of my refrigerator breaking the silence. That was the only sound I heard when I woke up that night, just the low mechanical buzz echoing through my small apartment. I didn't know why I was awake at first. There was no dream, no sudden jolt. My body just knew something was off. It was 2:47 a.m. The streetlight outside my window cast a pale amber glow over my wall, and for a moment I thought maybe that's what stirred me. The light flickering the way it sometimes did when wind rattled the pole. But there was no wind that night. There was nothing. I lived in a second-floor apartment in a narrow brick building that was old enough to creak when someone upstairs walked across their kitchen. But the unit above me had been empty for almost 3 weeks. The last tenant, a quiet older man named Frank, had died in his sleep, according to the landlord. Natural causes. He'd been there for years, and I only ever spoke to him twice, once when I moved in and once when he helped me shovel snow off the steps. After he passed, his family cleaned the place out, and it'd been dark ever since. No lights on at night, no footsteps, no smell of cigarettes drifting through the vents. Empty. That's what I was thinking about when I realized the refrigerator hum wasn't the only sound. Underneath it, faint and slow, came another one. A soft, deliberate thump. Then another, and another. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't random. It was rhythmic, measured, coming from directly above me. At first, I thought maybe I was half asleep, maybe hearing the pipes expand or the building settling, but then one of the thuds dragged slightly, like a heel scraping before it lifted again. It was unmistakably a footstep. Someone was walking up there. I sat up, staring at the ceiling. My pulse picked up in my neck, that heavy awareness that only comes when your mind starts trying to explain something that shouldn't be happening. I listened harder. The steps moved across the room, slow but purposeful. Then silence. Just the hum of my fridge again. I waited 1 second, 2, 5, 10, and when nothing followed, I started to relax a little. Maybe someone broke in, I thought. Maybe some local kid found out the apartment upstairs was vacant and decided to use it as a place to crash. I didn't love that idea, but it was better than other possibilities. I got out of bed, every board in the floor giving that old wooden moan that always felt too loud in the dark. I grabbed my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and stepped into the narrow hallway. The air felt colder than it had when I went to bed. Not by much, but just enough that I noticed. I stood by the door, listening again, hoping for silence so I could convince myself it was nothing. But right as I started to think it was safe to go back to bed, there came another sound. This time directly over me, near the entrance. It wasn't a footstep. It was like something heavy dragging. I held my breath. My light trembled in my hand. Then 3 slow knocks came through the ceiling. Dull, heavy, from the floor above. My heart jumped. Someone was definitely up there. The smart thing would have been to call the landlord, or even the police. But when you're standing in your own apartment at nearly 3 in the morning, trying not to sound crazy, you start making excuses to yourself. Maybe the landlord was working up there. Maybe the family came back to grab something. Maybe a 4th knock, harder this time. That ended the guessing. I put on my sneakers and stepped out into the hallway, the cool smell of dust and stale air hitting me immediately. The upstairs apartment was accessible by a separate set of stairs next to mine. The building was old, divided weirdly decades ago when it had been turned from a single home into 4 small units. I climbed the steps slowly, phone light bouncing off the peeling wallpaper. Each step groaned under my weight. When I reached the top, I could see the faint outline of the door. It was closed, no light coming from underneath. I listened for any sound inside. Nothing. I knocked softly, hesitated, then knocked again a little louder. Still nothing. I turned the knob. It was unlocked. My stomach dropped. I pushed the door open, and a wave of cold air swept past me. The smell hit next. Something faintly metallic and sour, like an old penny soaked in mildew. My flashlight beam trembled across the empty room. The furniture was gone. The walls were bare except for a few square outlines where pictures had once hung. The floor, though, looked strange. Dust covered most of it, but there were clear footprints in the middle of the living room. Bare footprints. Human. They led from one side of the room to the other and then just stopped. I followed them with the light, tracing their direction toward the far corner near the window. The glass was shut. There was no other door. Nowhere else they could have gone. I felt a chill crawl up the back of my neck. The smell seemed stronger near that corner. My mind started whispering all the possible reasons. Homeless person, squatter, maybe even an animal. But deep down, I knew these weren't animal prints. I'd seen enough footprints in mud and snow to know what human ones looked like. And these were fresh. The air in the room shifted suddenly, just enough to make the door behind me creak. I spun around. No one there. But when I turned back, something had changed. The footprints, those prints that had stopped at the corner, looked different. They were darker now, like the dust had thickened around them. I stepped closer, shining the light directly on them. They weren't just darker, they were wet. That's when I smelled it fully. Blood, not strong but distinct, metallic, sharp. I stumbled back toward the door. As I did, a faint sound came from behind me. Not a footstep this time, something softer, a long, slow inhale. It was the kind of sound a person makes when they wake up after holding their breath too long. I froze, flashlight aimed at nothing. My heart hammered so hard it felt like my ribs were vibrating. The breath came again, closer. I ran. Down the stairs into my apartment, slammed the door, and locked it twice. I pressed my back against it, chest heaving, listening for any sound of pursuit. There was none, just the hum of the fridge again. But after what felt like a full minute, I realized something. The hum had changed. It wasn't steady anymore. It buzzed, paused, buzzed again, like it was struggling to stay on. Then it cut off completely. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. My apartment was pitch black except for my flashlight beam, and now that the fridge was off, I could hear every tiny noise. The tick of the clock on the wall, the faint creak of wood as I shifted my weight. And then, so soft I almost thought I imagined it, came a sound I'll never forget. A knock. From inside my apartment. It came from the bedroom door. I stared at it for a long time, my body locked in place. It was closed. I had closed it earlier before going to bed. I knew that. Um, I'd even leaned my laundry basket against it because the hinges didn't quite fit right and it sometimes swung open on its own. Now I could see a faint shadow under the crack of the door, something shifting just barely in the flashlight's glow. "Who's there?" I managed to whisper, my throat dry as sandpaper. No answer. I stepped closer, slow, each step sounding like it echoed forever. The smell hit me again, faint but unmistakable, the same metallic tang from upstairs. It seeped from the gap under the door. I grabbed the doorknob before I could talk myself out of it and yanked it open. Empty. Completely empty. The flashlight beam swept across the bed, the desk, the small dresser. Nothing. But when I lowered the light, the floor caught my eye. Dust again, but disturbed, smudged, like someone had walked through. The footprints led from the window to the middle of the room, then stopped, just like the ones upstairs. That's when I realized the window was open. Just a crack, but it had been locked when I went to bed. I knew because I always locked it. I stepped closer, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to. The cool air brushed across my arm. Outside, the streetlight flickered. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something move across the parking lot below. A figure, tall and thin, slipping between the shadows toward the trees. The light blinked again, and it was gone. I locked the window and didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, sunlight felt foreign. The fear from the night clung to me like a wet coat. I told myself I'd imagined most of it. Stress, half sleep, the kind of waking dream you get when you're exhausted. But the smell had been real. The footprints had been real. Still, I didn't call anyone. I didn't want to sound crazy. That night, though, when I got home from work, there was an envelope taped to my door. No address, no stamp, just my name written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single photo, black and white, old. It showed a man sitting in a chair in what looked like my apartment, same window, same wall pattern, but everything else was different. The man looked sick, thin. His eyes were closed, mouth open just enough to show teeth. A date was written on the bottom, 1978. I flipped it over. One word was written on the back in the same shaky handwriting as the envelope. Still here. My hands went cold. I called the landlord immediately. He came over an hour later, a short, tired man in his 60s named Carl. When I showed him the photo, he frowned, rubbing his forehead. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. "It was taped to my door. Do you know who this is?" He studied it for a long time. Then his shoulders slumped a little. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's Mr. Decker. He owned this place before it was turned into apartments. Died in here. Heart attack, I think. 78 sounds right." I stared at him. "In this apartment?" He nodded. "Right there by the window, actually." The room tilted for a second. "Carl," I said, "there's something weird going on. Someone was in the upstairs unit last night. I heard them walking. I went up there. It was unlocked. And the floor. There were footprints. Blood, I think." He gave me a look halfway between disbelief and pity. "The upstairs door should have been locked. Nobody's got a key but me." "It wasn't locked," he sighed. "I'll check it tomorrow morning, okay? Don't worry about it tonight." But I did worry. I worried until I was sitting awake again at 2 a.m., every light in my place on, trying to drown out the feeling that something was waiting just out of sight. At 2:23 a.m., the refrigerator hum stopped again, and from above me came that same slow, deliberate thump. This time I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. The steps came closer to where my couch was, right above me, and then stopped. Silence stretched out for nearly a full minute before another sound joined it, a faint dragging noise, like something heavy sliding across the floor. I stood up slowly, my throat tight, and took one step toward the door. The dragging stopped. For maybe 3 seconds, everything was perfectly quiet. Then, clear as day, someone whispered my name. Not loud, not angry, just a soft, almost curious whisper. "Eli." I froze. My name isn't common. I hadn't told it to many people in this building. My body felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. The whisper came again, this time lower, closer. "Eli." I backed away toward my bedroom. The sound followed. Not footsteps, just the dragging, like someone pulling themselves across the floor. Then suddenly it stopped again. The silence felt like pressure against my ears. I tried to call 911, but my phone glitched. The screen froze on the dialer, then went black entirely. Dead battery. I hadn't even used it. I plugged it in. It didn't light up. Nothing did. The power was out again. No fridge hum. No clock tick. Just darkness. And then came the smell. It rolled down from the ceiling, that metallic decaying scent of old blood and something older, like damp soil and copper. My eyes watered from it. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it upward. That's when I saw it. A dark stain spreading across the ceiling. It wasn't there before. It grew as I watched, slow but steady, seeping between the boards, dripping downward in small, thick drops. I stepped back, heart hammering, as one of the drops fell to the floor beside me. It was dark red, sticky, blood. That broke me. I bolted out the door, down the stairs into the cold night air. I didn't stop until I reached the end of the driveway. My breath came out in clouds. The building loomed behind me, silent and dark. Only one window had a faint glow, the upstairs one. I swear I saw someone standing there, just a shape, still, watching. I slept in my car that night. In the morning, I went straight to Carl's office. I told him everything. The footsteps, the blood, the smell, the whisper. He looked skeptical at first, until I showed him the photo again and told him about the stain on the ceiling. He sighed and grabbed his keys. "Let's go take a look." When we got there, daylight made everything seem smaller, less menacing. But when we stepped into my apartment, he stopped dead in the doorway. The stain was still there, bigger now, dried into the plaster. Carl went upstairs and unlocked the unit above. I waited below. A minute passed, then 2. Then I heard him shout something, short, muffled. I ran up the steps, heart hammering. He stood in the middle of the empty apartment, staring at the floor. There was a dark patch there, same size and shape as the one on my ceiling. And right next to it, lying neatly in the dust, was a single old black and white photograph. Another one. It showed the same man, Mr. Decker. Only this time, his eyes were open. I moved out that week. Didn't even take my deposit back. Carl never called me again, and I never asked what he found when he cleaned the place. But I still have that first photo. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I take it out and look at it again under the lamplight. The man's face is calm, eyes closed, mouth slightly open. But lately, maybe it's just me, I swear it looks like his lips are curling upward, like he's smart at the end.